The rain was falling in steady sheets as Emma wiped down the last table of her shift, her worn sneakers soaked from a leak in the kitchen roof. She glanced outside through the fogged-up window, noticing a woman clutching a baby and holding the hand of a small boy, all three huddled under a narrow awning. Emma's heart clenched. She had seen them earlier, counting coins at the corner table, leaving quietly after ordering just one bowl of soup. Without asking permission or waiting for thanks, Emma packed 3 sandwiches, filled 2 cups with hot cocoa, and stepped out into the storm. The woman looked up with startled eyes, trembling with gratitude as Emma handed her the food without saying a word. "Just take care of them," Emma whispered, then returned inside, brushing off the chill and hiding the tears in her eyes. Her coworkers didn't notice. No one ever really noticed her, but that night, something unseen had taken root in the shadows. Across the street, a black SUV idled behind tinted windows, and inside, a man in a tailored suit had been watching everything, and for the first time in a long while, the cold CEO felt something stir in his chest, something that would not let him forget the girl in the apron and her quiet kindness. The next morning, Emma arrived early at the diner, her hair tied in a messy bun, face fresh but tired from another sleepless night. She didn't think twice about what she had done. Helping strangers came naturally to her, even if no one else ever seemed to notice. As she set down menus and refilled salt shakers, she didn't realize that the same black SUV from last night was once again parked across the street. Inside, the man with the cold eyes and sharp jawline reviewed her every movement, intrigued by something he couldn't quite define. His name was Julian Crossy, EO of Crosstech, a billionaire who never lingered, never looked twice, but couldn't stop watching this quiet waitress. Emma brought coffee to an older couple with a warm smile, laughing softly when the old man joked about her marrying his grandson. Julian sipped his espresso from a travel mug, wondering why the sight of her laughter made his chest ache in a way no deal or merger ever had. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We bring you love stories that warm your heart and stir your soul. Emma had no idea that her small kindness would soon change everything, and Julian had no idea that the girl he was watching would be the one to shake the very foundation of his life. Emma was halfway through her shift when the bell above the door chimed and a tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped inside, instantly drawing the attention of every customer. His presence was magnetic, sharp cheekbones, piercing eyes, and an aura of authority that made even the cook peek out from the kitchen. Emma glanced up briefly, not recognizing him, and walked over with a practiced smile, holding her notepad. As she greeted him politely, "Just coffee," Julian said, his voice smooth but low, as his eyes scanned her face with an intensity she didn't notice. She nodded and moved away, but her heart beat just a little faster. There was something about him that made her uneasy and curious all at once. Julian sat at the corner booth, the same one where the struggling family had eaten the night before, his gaze never leaving her as he watched how she moved, how she spoke, how she cared. He didn't understand it, but something about this girl reminded him of everything he had forgotten: empathy, sincerity, warmth. If this story is touching your heart so far, remember to subscribe for more stories like this. One true love doesn't always wear diamonds. Sometimes, it wears aprons and kindness. And as Emma poured his coffee and walked away without a second glance, Julian knew he'd be coming back. Julian returned the next morning, then the day after that, always sitting at the same booth, always ordering the same black coffee. Emma found it odd, but she didn't dare question it. Wealthy men with expensive watches didn't usually eat in places like hers. Still, he wasn't rude, never demanded attention, and always left generous tips. That made her coworkers whisper and speculate. She didn't let herself hope or assume anything. She had learned a long time ago that kindness from strangers was rarely permanent. But when she caught him watching her with an unreadable expression as she played peekaboo with a toddler at another table, something inside her stirred. Julian didn't speak much, but his silence said everything. He was listening, observing, connecting without a single word. Emma, unaware of the shift in his heart, just kept doing what she always did, being kind, honest, and invisible. But she was no longer invisible to him, and soon, neither would she be to the world. One rainy afternoon, as Emma stepped out to throw away the trash, she found herself face to face with a camera lens. A journalist had followed Julian, hoping to snap pictures of the elusive CEO in an unguarded moment, but instead caught him watching Emma with something close to tenderness. The next day the headline read, "Mystery CEO and the Diner Girl, what is Julian Cross hiding?" Emma nearly dropped the tray when her coworker showed her the tabloid, her face red with embarrassment and panic. She stormed outside during her break, only to find Julian already waiting by the sidewalk, his expression calm but unreadable. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said simply, but there was something in his voice that made her heartbeat falter. "Then why are you here?" she asked, barely above a whisper, to which he only responded, "Because I don't know how not to be." If you're hooked already, don't forget to like and follow our channel. Every heart has a story, and some are written in the most unexpected places. That day, the lines between them began to blur, even if neither of them admitted it aloud. A week later, Julian returned not as a customer, but as a man with a quiet question and a hope he barely understood. "Would you come to dinner with me?" he asked after closing, standing by the entrance like a shadow that didn't belong in her world. Emma looked at him in disbelief, flour still on her apron and exhaustion written in her bones. "You mean, like a date?" she asked, still holding a rag in her hand, unsure if she was dreaming. He nodded, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them, and for the first time, she felt the ground shift beneath her. "I don't have fancy dresses," she said honestly, "or conversation that's suitable for people like you." "Then, we'll talk like people," he replied, and it was the first time she saw him truly smile. Against all the odds and all of her instincts, she said yes. And just like that, a new chapter in both of their lives quietly began. Julian didn't take her to a five-star restaurant or a gala. He took her to a rooftop garden above one of his buildings, where candles flickered in jars and soft jazz played. From an old radio, Emma stood there in a simple blue dress she had borrowed from her neighbor, feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's dream. "This doesn't feel real," she whispered, as they sat across from each other beneath the stars, surrounded by city lights and gentle wind. "It isn't," Julian said with a smile, "but sometimes the best things aren't." They spoke for hours about their pasts, their loneliness, their strange connection, and Emma found herself laughing in ways she hadn't in years. Julian listened like no one else ever had, not interrupting, not judging, just being present. She told him about her childhood, her lost parents, her dreams she'd given up on, and for once, she didn't feel small or forgettable, she felt seen. After the rooftop night, something between them changed, though neither spoke of it directly. Julian continued visiting the diner, but now his gaze lingered longer, and Emma's smile grew easier around him. The regulars noticed and teased her gently, but she brushed them off, insisting nothing was happening. Still, when Julian helped her clean up one evening, rolling up his sleeves and laughing as he got flour on his suit, Emma realized her heart was no longer her own. "Why are you really here?" she asked again one night, drying her hands as they stood alone near the counter. "Because you reminded me that I'm still human," he replied, eyes locked to hers, voice low and sincere. In a world of transactions and contracts, Emma had given freely without agenda, without expectation, and that had shaken Julian's carefully built world more than any hostile takeover ever had. Julian showed up one morning with papers in his hand and a fire in his eyes. "I want to help you," he said, setting down a legal envelope on the counter before she could serve him coffee. Inside was an offer to buy the diner and hand it over to her debt-free, no strings attached. Emma stared at him, speechless, her fingers trembling as she held the papers. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice cracking under the weight of confusion and fear. "Because you gave hope to people you didn't even know, and I want to give something back to the woman who reminded me what that feels like." She refused at first, too proud, too overwhelmed, but Julian simply smiled and said, "Think about it. If this story is touching you like it's touching Julian, subscribe and hit the bell icon, because what's coming next might just change everything." That day, Emma began to see that maybe some gifts were meant to be accepted, not questioned. But just when things began to feel too perfect, the past came knocking. A man from Emma's past, her estranged brother, showed up at the diner, angry and bitter, demanding money she didn't have. He caused a scene, shouting accusations and revealing painful truths in front of customers and staff. Julian arrived moments later, calm but firm, stepping in front of Emma and quietly asking the man to leave. It was the first time Emma saw Julian not as the quiet CEO, but as a protector, and her heart twisted in a way she couldn't explain. Later, as she cried in the stockroom, Julian sat beside her, not offering solutions, just presence. "You don't have to face everything alone anymore," he said, and in his voice was a promise stronger than steel. Emma didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: something real was growing between them, and no storm could wash it away. Word spread fast in the city, and whispers about Julian Cross and the diner girl turned from curiosity to scandal. In the business world, Emma began noticing new faces in the diner: reporters pretending to be customers, women glaring at her, and men taking secret photos. Her coworkers, once supportive, grew distant, fearing they might lose their jobs if the diner got dragged into the CEO's world. Julian tried to shield her, but even his influence couldn't erase headlines or jealous tongues. One afternoon, Emma confronted him in frustration, her hands shaking as she asked, "What is this doing to my life?" He took her hand gently, his voice steady. "It's not just your life anymore, Emma, it's ours, if you want it." But she didn't answer, she simply turned away, confused by fear, love, and the life she never asked for. If you're loving this story, don't forget to support our channel. Every share helps these emotional stories reach more hearts like yours. Julian invited her to a formal dinner hosted by one of his board members, assuring her it was important, but not pressure-filled. Emma reluctantly agreed, borrowing a black dress from a friend and doing her own hair, feeling like a stranger in the mirror. When she arrived at the luxury penthouse, every eye turned to her, and though Julian greeted her with warmth, others greeted her with disdain. She overheard phrases like charity, case, and project girl, and each one felt like a pin to her chest. She stayed close to Julian, but his world was cold and polished, so unlike hers, and it made her feel like a smudge on glass. Still, when she saw him looking at her like she was the most radiant thing in the room, something inside her refused to shrink. He leaned down and whispered, "They see someone out of place, but I see the only person who belongs." That night, despite the stares and murmurs, she left, holding his hand a little tighter. Emma couldn't sleep after the party. Julian's world spinning in her head like a storm she didn't know how to calm. She thought about how far apart their lives were, how many people would never accept her beside him. The next day, she didn't text him back, and at work, she stayed in the kitchen longer than usual, avoiding the front. Julian noticed her absence, and for the first time in years, he felt genuine worry that had nothing to do with profit margins or stock prices. That evening, he came to the diner, waiting silently until her shift ended, then asking, "Did I do something wrong?" She looked at him with tired eyes and said, "No, but maybe I don't belong in your world." He shook his head and replied, "Then I'll leave that world for you." Her breath caught, not expecting that kind of answer, but, deep down, a part of her had hoped for it. Julian disappeared for 2 days, and Emma thought maybe she had pushed him too far. But on the third day, a delivery truck arrived at the diner with boxes full of fresh equipment, a repaired roof, and new uniforms, none of it branded, all of it anonymous. Inside one of the boxes was a handwritten note. "Your world is better than mine. Let me build with you instead." Emma stood in the middle of the dining room, holding the note like it was made of gold, tears stinging her eyes. Her coworkers were stunned, and one of them whispered, "Girl, I think he's serious." Later that night, Julian came by quietly, standing at the door without entering, just waiting. Emma didn't say anything. She simply walked to him and hugged him tightly, wordlessly accepting the bridge he had just built between their worlds. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she was allowed to dream. Julian picked her up after work one night, telling her he needed to show her something far from city lights and noise. They drove for hours in silence, winding up in a quiet hilltop field overlooking a small lake, where stars blanketed the sky. Emma stepped out barefoot, the grass cool beneath her feet, and looked up, stunned by the view. "I come here when I need to remember I'm human," Julian said, standing beside her, hands in his pockets. She reached for his hand without thinking, and they stood that way for a long time, saying nothing. Finally, she whispered, This I understand. This feels like something I can hold on to." He looked at her with a tenderness that caught her off guard and said, "Then I'll build everything here, if it means you'll stay." Under that sky, their hearts whispered things their lips hadn't dared to say yet. At his next board meeting, Julian shocked his executives by announcing a temporary leave from several public appearances and a donation to small food programs. Across the city, the media exploded with speculations. Some said he was sick, others said he'd lost his edge. But behind the headlines, Julian sat in Emma's tiny apartment, helping her make pasta, flour on his suit pants, and peace in his heart. "You're not like the man on the magazine covers," she said playfully, wiping sauce from his chin. "That man never existed," he said quietly, "not until I met you." Emma smiled but said nothing, her heart aching at how fragile and beautiful this new version of him was. And while the world questioned Julian's silence, he was finally speaking the loudest to the one person who mattered most. Emma didn't tell anyone it was her birthday, too used to letting it slip by quietly, but when she walked into the diner that morning, the tables were covered in yellow daisies, her favorite flower, and a small piano played softly in the corner. Julian was waiting with a shy smile, holding a single cupcake and a note that said, "To the girl who taught me how to feel." She laughed and cried all at once, completely unprepared for the affection, the thought, the care. Everyone in the diner clapped, and for once, she wasn't invisible, she was celebrated. "This is too much," she said, overwhelmed. But Julian only whispered, "You are worth more." For the first time, Emma let herself believe it might be true. And that night, with laughter and music in the air, she blew out a candle and wished for something she already had loved. Just when things seemed calm, the diner's landlord announced that the building was going up for sale to a commercial developer. Emma Panikshi had just begun to build something of her own, and now it was slipping through her fingers. Julian offered to buy it immediately, but Emma hesitated, not wanting to depend on him for everything. "This place is my story," she said. "I need to fight for it." Julian nodded, respecting her will, and said, "Then let me fight beside you." Together, they planned fundraisers, community events, and brought media attention to small businesses like hers. If you're loving this emotional journey, please subscribe and stay with us, because love isn't just whispered under stars. It's also found in the fight to protect what matters. Dozens of customers, neighbors, and families gathered outside the diner with signs and support, demanding the property remain in Emma's hands. News crews arrived, capturing the crowd, the story, and the woman at the center of it all. Julian stayed close but quiet, letting Emma be the voice, the strength, the heart of the movement. She gave a small speech, hands shaking, voice cracking, but the truth in her words made people listen. "This place doesn't just serve food, it serves dignity, warmth, hope," she said, tears sliding down her cheeks. The footage went viral within hours, and donations from across the country poured in to help her buy the building. The landlord, pressured and surprised by the outpouring of support, agreed to sell to her directly. Emma stood with the keys in her hand days later, knowing this was no longer just a diner, it was home. That night, long after the last customer had left and the chairs were stacked, Julian stood with Emma by the door, both of them quiet. "You did it," he said softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "We did it," she replied, her eyes full of gratitude and something deeper. He took her hands gently and asked, "What do you want now, Emma?" She stepped closer, heart pounding, eyes searching his. "I want this," she whispered, "but only if it's real." Julian leaned down, slowly, reverently, and kissed her with a tenderness that made the whole world fall away. In that moment, there were no CEOs, no rumors, no power differences, just two people who had finally found each other. And that kiss told her everything she needed to know. It was real. The kiss lingered in Emma's mind all night, even as she folded laundry and made tea in her small kitchen, unsure if she'd just imagined it. Julian didn't call or text the next day, and a small part of her worried she had misunderstood what it meant. But when she arrived at the diner, there he was, already seated in his usual booth, reading the newspaper like it was any other morning. Their eyes met, and neither spoke for a long moment until he stood, walked toward her, and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead like it was the most natural thing in the world. "We don't have to rush," he whispered, "but I'm not stepping back." Emma smiled, her chest full of quiet warmth, and nodded. That day, she worked with a strange lightness in her step, even as customers teased her about her mysterious man. And she didn't correct them, because for the first time, the label didn't scare her, it felt right. A famous magazine requested an interview with Emma about her story, her rise from humble waitress to owner, and her unexpected relationship with Julian Cross. She almost declined, but Julian gently encouraged her, saying, "You've earned your place in this world, don't hide from it." The reporter came with cameras and bright lights, but Emma spoke honestly, humbly, never trying to sound perfect. She talked about fear, struggle, and how sometimes love finds us when we're too busy surviving to look for it. Julian sat nearby, during the interview, not interrupting, just watching with pride in his eyes. When the article was published, it went viral. People around the country were inspired by her resilience and her heart. Emma became a symbol of hope for those who had little, and her face appeared on morning shows and headlines. She didn't chase fame, but she embraced the opportunity to speak for people like her, people the world usually ignored. Just when things seemed stable, Emma's former boss, the diner's original owner, filed a lawsuit, claiming she had used Julian's influence to steal the place. The news spread quickly, and suddenly people began to question her story, her integrity, her love. Julian's lawyers assured her they'd handle it, but Emma was devastated by the betrayal and the whispers online. "I thought if I did everything right, this kind of thing wouldn't happen," she told Julian, tears streaking her cheeks. He pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and said, "Truth doesn't always protect you, but I will." She didn't want to be rescued, but she also didn't want to fight alone anymore. Together, they gathered evidence, testimonies, and even old employees who defended Emma's journey and character. And when the case was dismissed weeks later, Julian held her hand in court, and Emma knew this wasn't just a love story, it was a partnership. After the trial, Emma returned to the diner, unsure how customers would react, her heart pounding, as she opened the door. But the moment she stepped inside, people began clapping, regulars, neighbors, and even strangers, all standing to welcome her home. Flowers covered the tables, and a note hung above the counter. "You've fed our hearts for years, let us do the same for you." Emma cried openly for the first time in public, overwhelmed by kindness and the feeling of being truly seen. Julian arrived an hour later with takeout and no suit, just jeans and a flannel, more like her than ever. He kissed her cheek in front of everyone, and no one looked away this time. They celebrated it. Emma leaned against him in the corner, smiling through tears. And for the first time since all of this began, she felt something new settle inside her. Peace. They spent their first night truly together, not in a hotel or mansion, but in Emma's tiny apartment, curled up on her worn couch with old movies playing in the background. She made grilled cheese and tomato soup, and he insisted it was better than anything he'd ever eaten. They talked for hours, not about money or work, but about childhood fears, silly dreams, and what love meant to each of them. Julian admitted he hadn't truly touched someone emotionally in years, not since his mother died. Emma confessed she'd never really trusted someone with her full self, not until him. That night, their bodies met not out of passion but of intimacy, souls slowly learning each other with gentleness and truth. They fell asleep with fingers interlaced, skin against skin, and the world far away. And when the morning light touched their faces, both knew something sacred had just begun. Emma received a letter in the mail from the same woman she once gave food to during the rain, the mother with the baby and young boy. Inside was a photo of the family smiling in their new home, a thank you note, and a message that read, "You saved us." That night changed everything. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, the photo shaking in her hands, tears flooding her eyes. Julian walked in and took the letter gently, reading it in silence before pulling her into a soft embrace. "This is who you are," he said, "someone whose quiet actions change lives." Emma hung the photo in the diner the next day, right next to the register, where everyone could see it. She titled it Grace in Small Moments. And whenever she felt doubt or fear again, she would glance at that photo and remember that kindness leaves echoes. A viral tweet speculated that Julian was about to propose, and suddenly the diner was swarmed by curious reporters and romantic hopefuls. Emma was flustered, annoyed, and more than a little overwhelmed. She didn't even know where Julian stood on marriage. When she asked him about it privately, he only smiled mysteriously and said, "Would you say yes if I did?" Emma stared at him, heart racing, unsure how to answer something so big with just one word. "I'd say, let's keep building first," she finally whispered, and he kissed her hand in silent agreement. There were no rings yet, no flashy announcements, but their bond deepened with that unspoken understanding. They were choosing each other every day, and for now, that was enough. But Emma knew deep down that he had already made the promise. Even without the ring, Julian took Emma to meet his grandmother, the only living family he had left, a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a tender soul. Emma was nervous, wearing a soft green dress and holding a homemade pie with trembling hands. The old woman watched her carefully, then simply said, "He hasn't smiled like this since he was 10. They had tea in the garden, and Emma listened as Julian's grandmother told stories about his childhood, about the boy he used to be before business made him steal. "I was afraid he'd die alone in a glass tower," she whispered to Emma later, "but you've melted the glass." On the way home, Julian held Emma's hand tightly and said nothing, but she knew this meant everything to him. That night, they didn't need to say "I love you." It was already written in every glance, every silence, every breath. A short circuit in the kitchen caused a small fire in the diner late one night, and though no one was hurt, the damage was enough to force a temporary closure. Emma stood outside, eyes burning with tears, watching the smoke rise from the place she had fought so hard to keep. Julian arrived minutes later, wrapping her in his coat and whispering, "We'll fix it, together." The next morning, the community launched a fundraiser before Emma could even ask. Within hours, they had enough to begin repairs. Volunteers came from every direction, former customers, old coworkers, even strangers who had seen her interview online. Emma worked side by side with them, paintbrush in one hand and Julian's hand in the other. And when the diner reopened weeks later, it was more than restored, it was reborn. Because love, once it touches something, never leaves it unchanged. On the reopening night, the diner was packed with laughter, music, and people who had followed Emma's journey from the very beginning. Julian stood beside her in the doorway, watching with pride as she welcomed everyone with grace, kindness, and the same warmth that had first drawn him to her. When the clock struck midnight, he pulled her to the center of the room, raised a glass and made a simple toast, "To Emma, the heart of this place, and the light of my life." The crowd cheered, but she could only look at him with wide, tearful eyes, love written all over her face. "You changed my life," she whispered as he pulled her close. "No," he said, "you saved mine." And in front of the world, he kissed her again, not as a CEO, not as a man above her, but as her equal, her partner, her home. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more love stories that restore faith in the human heart, because sometimes a simple act of kindness can change everything, even the life of a powerful CEO. Emma and Julian took a weekend away in a secluded cabin by the lake, far from cameras, headlines, and the ever-buzzing city. The silence was healing, the air filled with pine and the soft ripple of water against the shore. They cooked together, played cards, and danced barefoot on the wooden floor, two old songs from Julian's childhood. Emma laughed like she hadn't in weeks, and Julian watched her like a man who had finally come home. "You don't need to give me the world," she said one night, resting her head on his chest. "You gave it to me the moment you stepped outside in the rain," he replied. That night, they made love slowly, not like people proving something, but like two souls choosing each other, completely and without fear. And in the stillness afterward, Emma whispered, "I think I'm ready for forever." When they returned to the city, Julian didn't wait. He called a local jeweler and asked for something simple, timeless, and made for a woman who wore kindness like gold. He didn't plan a grand event or call photographers. Instead, he brought her to the rooftop garden where they had shared their first real dinner. Emma arrived with wind in her hair and coffee in her hand, still in her work uniform, confused. When she saw candles again, Julian knelt without a word, pulling out the small velvet box, his hands trembling slightly. "Not because the world wants it," he said softly, "but because I do, because you are my world." Emma covered her mouth, tears instantly welling in her eyes, nodding before she could speak. "Yes," she finally whispered, 1,000 times, yes. And when he slid the ring onto her finger, it wasn't about diamonds, it was about everything they had built with bare hands and open hearts. A week later, Emma received a letter from her estranged father, a man she hadn't heard from in over a decade. He had seen her story in the news, recognized her smile, and wrote not for forgiveness, but to say he was proud of her. She sat at the kitchen table for hours, reading the simple words over and over, unsure whether to feel joy, pain, or closure. Julian held her hand and offered no advice, only presence, which was exactly what she needed. That night, she lit a small candle by the window and whispered a quiet thank you to the man who had disappeared but unknowingly helped her become who she was. She didn't write back, not yet, but she didn't tear the letter up either. Healing, she realized, didn't always come with clean endings. Sometimes it came with space to breathe, and a hand to hold while doing it. Emma didn't want a designer gown or a wedding planned by corporate assistants. She wanted something real, simple, and full of memory. She visited a vintage shop downtown and found an old satin dress with tiny embroidered flowers, imperfect but beautiful, just like her life. Julian didn't ask what she chose. He simply smiled and said, "If you wear it, I'll be honored." They planned a small ceremony on the roof of the diner, surrounded by fairy lights, yellow daisies, and everyone who had walked through their journey. The day before, Emma stood alone in the mirror, running her fingers over the dress's delicate thread, tears falling for the girl she used to be, the one who thought no one saw her. She didn't vanish, she whispered. She just grew into someone new. And when she stepped into the sunlight the next day, she didn't just look like a bride, she looked like a survivor who chose love. The wedding was soft and golden, held at sunset on the same rooftop where their story had shifted. Emma walked down the aisle to the sound of live violin and cheers from her customers, co-workers, and the family she had built from strangers. Julian stood at the end, eyes full of emotion he never let the world see, wearing a tailored suit and a heart wide open. When she reached him, he took her hands and whispered, "No vows could say enough, but I promise you everything." Emma smiled through tears and replied, "You gave me everything the moment you saw me." The officiant kept it short, but the moment was eternal. Their kiss was soft and deep, and the city below erupted in car horns and cheers from people watching from windows. And just like that, the waitress and the CEO became something greater than titles. They became a story of love that no one could deny. They didn't fly off to Paris or a private island. Instead, they took a road trip through small towns, stopping at roadside diners and sleeping in cozy inns. Emma insisted on paying for meals sometimes, wanting to remind them both that balance mattered. They made playlists, sang off-key, and had deep talks under stars with nowhere to be and no one to impress. Julian had never felt freer and shackled from expectations, surrounded by love and laughter. In one small town, they found a mural on a brick wall that read, "Love doesn't find you when you're ready, it finds you when you're real." Emma took a photo of it and smiled, saying, "That's us." Julian pulled her close and replied, "It always will be." And that night, in a tiny bed with worn sheets and cracked windows, they celebrated love in its purest form, quiet, deep, and unstoppable. When they returned, Emma had a surprise waiting. She had signed a lease for a second location, a smaller diner near a school district, where students could eat for free if they couldn't pay. "You taught me how to build," she told Julian, handing him the key. "Now let's build for others." Julian was speechless, pride swelling in his chest, more than any boardroom win had ever made him feel. Together, they met with volunteers, set up donations, and created a program called Dignity First. Emma named the new place the Kind Cup, and on opening day, dozens of children and families filled the space. Julian watched from the back, eyes misty, realizing he had never built anything this meaningful until now. "You changed the definition of success for me," he told her that night, and she kissed him softly, whispering, "You changed the definition of love for me." One rainy afternoon, the same little boy from that first rainy night came in with his mother, now healthy, smiling, and clean. Emma recognized them instantly, tears forming as the woman held out a small box. Inside was a wooden heart the boy had carved in school, with the words "Thank you, Miss Emma" etched into it with crooked letters. Emma hugged them both tightly, overwhelmed by the full-circle moment she never saw coming. Julian joined her, taking the little boy's hand and saying, "You were the beginning of everything." The family sat down to eat, and Emma didn't charge them, she never would. Later that night, she hung the wooden heart above the door of the diner, where everyone could see it. It wasn't expensive, but it was the most valuable thing she owned. A year passed since the rooftop wedding, and Emma stood in front of a mirror with trembling hands, holding a small white test in disbelief. "Julian," she called softly, her voice shaking, and when he came rushing in, she simply showed him the 2 pink lines. His reaction was instantaneous, laughter, and a gentle kiss to her belly before dropping to his knees. "You gave me a home," he whispered. "Now, we'll fill it with love." Over the next months, they prepared the nursery, still ran the diner, and lived with gratitude in every breath. Emma worked less, laughed more, and glowed with a happiness she never thought possible. Julian spoke to her belly every night, telling stories and promises, already the father he never had. And as the due date neared, they both knew this was the beginning of something even more powerful than love. Their daughter was born on a cool spring morning. her first cry soft but strong, her little hands gripping Julian's finger like she already knew him. Emma held her close, tears falling as she whispered, "You are everything I never dared to dream." Julian stood beside them, eyes wet, saying, "And now you'll grow up knowing what love looks like." They named her Grace, the very thing that had started all of this on a rainy night with a simple act of kindness. The diner thrived. The second location expanded, and their story inspired thousands who believed they were invisible. On their anniversary, Emma stood at the door of the diner, Grace in her arms, Julian beside her, and smiled at a young woman sitting alone in the rain outside. She stepped forward with 2 cups of cocoa, just like she had years ago, and said, "Here, Jess, in case no one else sees you today. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe because kindness may start small, but it always echoes forever."